Welcome to another bite-sized tutorial from Fortress Learning. My name is Jane McIntosh and I'm a trainer and assessor here at Fortress. Today's bite-sized tutorial is looking at validation, why we need to do it and why we need to contribute. But also, do we need to do more than just validate? In the vet sector, we've all heard the word validation, but what does it actually mean? Validation is a quality review of the assessment process. It takes place by a group of qualified individuals coming together to review the assessment tools and assessment judgments for a particular unit of competency. Now, before we continue, there's a few things that I'd like to comment on here. Firstly, when I say a group of qualified individuals, the group must collectively have vocational competencies and current industry skills to the assessment being validated. In other words, they need to have relevant industry qualifications, experience, and currency in the unit that's being validated. They must hold the relevant TAE qualification, for example, the minimum of the Cert 4 TAE, such as the TAE40116, and they must have current knowledge and skills in vocational teaching and learning. So the group as a whole, they must collectively hold these things. I'd also like to point out that an assessor cannot validate assessment judgments that they have made. So in other words, if this person here made the assessment judgment on this assessment, then they can't be involved in validating that assessment judgment. The other three members of this team could validate that person's assessment judgments. The person can still participate and be part of the validation team, and they can validate assessment judgments made by other assessors. Before the validation meeting, the number of assessments conducted for the unit being validated over a specific period of time will be identified. So let's say in the last 6 months, we conducted 100 assessments for this unit. A sample of these assessments will be randomly selected. The sample size is determined by using the ASCO calculator. Here you just put in the number of assessments marked, so in our example it's 100, and the ASCO calculator will then tell you the number of assessments to be validated, and this is 31 in our example. The assessor group will then check that the assessment tools meet the principles of assessment, including all of the requirements of the unit of competency, and that the rules of evidence are adhered to and correct assessment judgments were made. So validation is about ensuring that the assessment tool determines if a person can do the job or not according to all of the requirements in the unit of competency, ensuring there is consistency amongst assessors to ensure that two different assessors are marking the same assessment in the same way and would result in the same assessment judgment, identifying questions which students commonly get wrong, as these questions probably need to be reworded or students need to be trained correctly, ensuring instructions to both students and assessors are clearly understood. The intention of the validation discussion is to make recommendations to improve the assessment tool and/or processes and make these changes. So in short, validation is about ongoing continuous improvement, specifically relating to assessment. Validation is essentially conducted after the assessment has been taken place and certificates have been issued. Standards for RTOs 2015 include 4 clauses which directly relate to validation, and these prescribe the minimum standards we need to adhere to when validating. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but the 4 clauses that are in the standards are clause 1.9, 1.10, 1.11. We'll have a look at 1.25 in a sec. But these 3 clauses state that RTOs must have a 5-year plan in place to conduct ongoing systematic validation of assessment practices and judgments. And this plan must ensure that all training products on scope must be validated in that 5-year period, with 50% of these validated within the first 3 years. They do indicate that high-risk training products should be validated more regularly. Clause 1.11 indicates who can be involved in a validation and the competencies that the group should collectively hold, and we covered this in a previous slide. There is an additional clause relating to RTOs delivering TAE qualifications, which is clause 1.25, and this requires validation to be conducted by an independent individual or group. As I mentioned, it's only for RTOs who train TAE products. So these are the minimum requirements for validation as specified in the standards. So now we've had a pretty good look at what validation is. Now let's have a look at the benefit of contributing towards validation. In the live webinar, I asked our participants to participate in a Mentimeter by inputting why they feel it is important to contribute or participate in validations. These are some of the things that came up. There are going to be a lot of words, and I'll focus on the big ones first. Better assessments, better understanding of the units of competency requirements, inputs into improvements, group understanding, consistency, reduce repetition of assessment, discussions about the requirements of the units of competency, share ideas, marking correctly, improving instructions for both students and assessors, identifying badly worded questions, and identifying incorrect answer guides. So there's a lot of benefits in participating in validation, and I'm sure you could come up with many more. Participating in a validation can add a lot of value to those who contribute, but also those contributions of the different team members can lead to improved assessment processes and tools. Remember, it could just be one person who has developed the assessment tool, and that person may not be a qualified trainer assessor and may not even be an industry expert. You know, sometimes in larger RTOs, there's a department, a team of developers, and there's a team of trainers and assessors, and there's maybe very little interaction between the two teams. So by getting a group of qualified people together, such as trainers and assessors, the assessment developers, possibly some subject matter experts, compliance representatives, RTO manager. It ensures that discussion takes place that includes input from different perspectives. So let's have a look at what some of those different perspectives could be. It's the trainers and assessors who are at the coalface. They are face to face with the students. So they have a really good understanding of trouble areas. So, if there's unclear instructions to students and assessors, if there are badly written questions which students are continuously getting wrong, they understand areas that frustrate students. Maybe there's unnecessary repetition of assessment tasks, or there might be some assessor guidelines which aren't very clear when they're marking assessments. Also having different assessors who review assessment judgments of others contributes to discussions about how the judgment should be made. So when should it be satisfactory and when is it not yet satisfactory? You might find that one assessor is marking too leniently and another one might be too strict. So it's understanding what the requirement is so that there's consistency amongst the assessors. By compliance representatives being part of the team, their focus will be on ensuring the requirements of the unit are adhered to. So, if the unit specifies that a student must demonstrate the task 3 times and with a real person, then they will make sure that the assessment assesses these requirements. Subject matter experts might come from a different angle, and they might pick up things such as outdated regulations or procedures, or they may pick up something where a statement is used in the wrong context, or a word, the incorrect word is used. Including the developers on the validation team, they can indicate why an assessment task has been written in a certain way. So if they are required to do an assessment like a task 3 times, they might explain this to the assessors because it's in the unit, and then the assessor can then explain it to the students. So these discussions require the group to take the time to really unpack the unit of competency and ensure everybody understands it in the same way and identifies ways to improve the assessment tools and ensure consistency between assessors. Please remember that even assessments that are purchased off the shelf need to be contextualized for your target group. And these also need to be validated because at the end of the day, you are responsible to ensure that that assessment meets the requirements of the unit. So from this, we can see how the involvement of different stakeholders in the validation process can result in better processes for assessment and better assessment tools. So in summary, validation is an ongoing continuous improvement of the assessment process and tools. It's a systematic process that must be followed according to the RTO's 5-year validation plan, and it takes place after assessment judgments have been made. Validation is conducted by a group of qualified individuals that collectively meet the requirements specified in Clause 1.11. This group then determines, does the assessment process and tool meet the principles of assessment? Part of the principles of assessment, the validity rule, ensures that the assessment meets the requirements of the unit of competency. They ensure that the evidence meets the rules of evidence, and they look at a random sample of assessment judgments made for the unit of competency being validated, and they ensure the accuracy and consistency of the assessment judgments made. Throughout this discussion, they're going to identify areas for improvement. This is recorded in a validation checklist or report and in the RTO's continuous improvement register, and then changes are made to the assessment process or tools for that unit of competency. So that's the validation process. The only problem is if we only do this after we have issued qualifications, it may be too late. Imagine if we were selling physical products such as cars, and they were only checked once they had been sold. That would never happen. Despite numerous safety checks before they land up in the showroom, we still often hear of products or cars being recalled. Now, although we often view teaching as a service, I think it's useful to understand that our end product is a competent, work-ready individual. So when we issue their qualification or statement of attainment, we are saying that they are able to do the job they have undertaken training in. But what happens if we validate assessments that we conducted 6 months after we issued students with their qualification? For example, the Diploma of Early Childhood Education and Care. And 6 months later, we realized we didn't include one of the core units, which was maintain a safe and healthy environment for children. Would you want your child to be under that person's care? This could have enormous consequences. And what would happen is that the RTO would need to recall the qualifications and ensure that all of those students who we issued the qualification to underwent further assessment in the unit that hadn't been included before reissuing them with the qualification. If we conduct a validation and find that one of the assessors that marked a particular student cohort operate a forklift had only assessed students in forklift driving skills. So they were great forklift drivers, but they weren't assessed in their competence in ensuring a safe environment. There are so many forklift accidents because people don't secure the environment. So what would we do where this assessor had deemed them competent when they weren't competent? Can you imagine if you achieved your Cert 4 TAE, you got a job in training and assessment, so you've got the qualification that you need for that job, and then you were told by the RTO that they hadn't assessed you in a unit and they had to recall your qualification? You could lose your job as a trainer and assessor or have to go and work under supervision until you had been reassessed or assessed in the area that had been left out. This has happened to RTOs who have been found non-compliant in audits. They've had to recall qualifications. Some have been deregistered as a result. So to guard against this from happening, it's recommended not to only validate your assessment tools and systems at the end of the process, but to ensure that your assessment tools meet the requirements of the training package before you even deliver it. So there are other things that we should be doing in addition to validation. In ASCO's Spotlight on webinar on validation, they've indicated that validation is about ongoing continuous improvement, and this is referred to in clauses 1.9, 1.10, 1.11, and 1.25. So we've already looked at this. But in addition to this, they've mentioned other processes that we should be doing to ensure that we conduct effective assessment and produce job-ready students. So let's have a look at these. The first one is verification, which is before using tools. Now, you may have referred to this as pre-validation. Here at Fortress, we include pre-validation or verification in our 5-year validation plan, where we pre-validate all of our assessment tools prior to actually using them. So this enables us to check that our assessment tools cover all of the requirements of the unit of competency and meet the packaging rules of the qualification. And we get the trainers and assessors together, go through the assessment tool, check for understanding, check the mapping, check that instructions for the students and assessors are clear and simple. Remember, it's also important to verify or pre-validate any assessment tools that you purchase, as the onus of compliance lies with you. Then we've got moderation. Now, moderation, it says here, before finalizing judgment. So this is when we review assessment judgments before we finalize the assessment judgment. In other words, we will review the assessment either before the student is notified of a competency result or before they're issued with the statement of attainment or qualification. Here at Fortress, we do this as standard practice with all of our new assessors. Let's say for a period of 6 months, all of their assessment judgments will be moderated before the student is notified of their outcome. And we also conduct random moderations before qualifications are issued. You'll notice that both verification and moderation are aligned to clause 1.8, and moderation is also aligned to clause 3.1. So let's have a look at what these clauses say. Clause 1.8 says that the RTO implements an assessment system that ensures that assessment, including RPL, complies with the assessment requirements of the relevant training package or VET accredited course. So this means that the assessment tools must address all of the required skills and knowledge. In other words, you need to ensure that the assessment tool assesses performance criteria, foundation skills, performance evidence, knowledge evidence, as well as ensuring the conditions of assessment have been met, which have been specified in the unit of competency, and it includes the dimensions of competency, so students demonstrate their ability to do the tasks in different contexts and environments. And Part B of Clause 1.8 says that it's conducted in accordance with the principles of assessment and rules of evidence. So just as a reminder, the principles of assessment are fairness, flexibility, validity, and reliability. And the rules of evidence are that the evidence is valid, sufficient, authentic, and current. So clause 1.8 was aligned to verification as well as moderation. In addition to this, moderation is aligned to clause 3.1, which states that the RTO issues AQF certification documentation only to a learner whom it has assessed as meeting the requirements of the training product as specified in the relevant training package or VET accredited course. So what this means is that if an individual holds a qualification or statement of attainment, it is saying that they have fully demonstrated that they are competent in the units that they've been issued. In other words, students are work ready when we issue them with the qualification. And that's why moderation is aligned to this, because we should be checking that the assessment judgments are correct before we issue them with their final qualification. So to ensure that we conduct effective assessments that produce qualified, work-ready individuals, we need to do more than just validate. You need to conduct quality reviews throughout the assessment process, rather than only validating after qualifications have already been issued. And to do this, you need to verify, moderate, and validate your assessment tools and processes. Verification or pre-validation takes place once assessment tools have been developed and before these are given to students to complete. This is when you check the tools are correctly mapped to the unit of competency and instructions are clear and simple to follow for both students and assessors. Moderation. This is when we review assessment judgments after students have been assessed, but before they are issued with any of their certificates or qualifications. And then validation is the final stage where assessment tools and judgments are reviewed after student completions. This is where we review the assessment tools and processes to continually improve the assessment process. It makes good business sense for the RTO, its students, and its trainers and assessors to include all three of these processes into their assessment review, continuously improving along the way. Validation is only one small part of the process. So that brings us to the end of today's session. I hope the session has given you a better idea of what validation is about, the benefits of contributing to validation, but more than that, why we need to verify and moderate our assessment processes, tools, and judgments. Thank you for joining me today. If you benefited from this webinar, you may want to visit our Fortress website for more bite-sized tutorials, and our website is www.fortresslearning.edu.au. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.